What is going on, my friends? Today we are doing a bit of a fun one. As per the community post that I put up yesterday, asking for you guys for what videos you wanted to see. I'm always trying to kind of play the line between what is going to get clicks and continue to grow to the channel and what I feel is quality information that's actually helping people. I kind of want to tick both of those boxes, rather than keeping the channel super niche. And then not growing. Obviously, that doesn't make me feel great about the channel. And on the other side of the coin, I don't want to ever feel like I'm not providing what I at least feel is quality information. So I read through the video suggestions and I had a fun idea. Someone asked me just for a list of what I felt were the best or generally helpful bench press accessory motions. And I said, hey, why not make a tier list out of that? That sounds kind of fun and interesting. So I put up a community thing asking you guys for what accessories you would like to see in this tier list, and you guys jumped on it, and I really appreciate that. Made me smile how many we got in here. And so we're going to be going through and putting a whole bunch of different accessory motions into a tier list. Now, before anyone asks, as someone mentioned in the community post, a lot of people might differentiate between what is an accessory exercise, what is an auxiliary exercise, what is a variation. And because exercise programming has not really permeated into science quite as much, in academia quite as much, we don't really have formal definitions of any of these things. Lots of lifters who like to put out information will kind of give definitions for these terms that kind of let them convey the idea of an exercise slot. So they say, oh, a variation is motion that's relatively close to the main thing we want, and we're going to probably train it in the lower rep ranges with the goal of direct transference over to our main motion or technical carryover to main motion. But then an auxiliary motion or accessory motion, that might mean something that's further away and just meant to hypertrophy the relevant musculature. I know Dave Tate has a similar system of the terms for the slots of accessories. I usually like to just explain the exercise slot as a sentence rather than use a specific word for it. So I have always used accessories, auxiliary motions somewhat interchangeably, right? So in this video, we're actually going to have a mixture of things that are close variations of the bench press, probably intended to be performed for lower reps, for some amount of direct carryover or technical carryover, and then some things that look nothing like the bench press that are much, much further away, and they're meant to just grow the musculature associated with being a good bencher. And we're not going to assess them on a what's going to add 40 pounds to your bench the most, because frankly, the things that look most like the bench would be the best ones, and the ones that look the least like the bench would be the worst ones if direct carryover was all we were assessing. But we're kind of assessing how well they fill their role within a strength training program for increasing our bench press. And because I figured why not, I decided I would have my girlfriend come and give her opinion. Does she have any qualification?
Yes.
No, more or less none, but we're going to include it. She's benched 165, which with a pretty minuscule arch and a relatively narrow grip. Not to bash the big arch benching, as it's the competitive meta, especially within women's powerlifting, and that's fine. But I do think that the no arch close grip is a greater feat of strength. So I'll drop that. That's worth something. And 265 squat.
266.
266 pound squat, and no deadlift to be mentioned. So that's some kind of qualification. So we're going to have Kirsten weigh in on where we're ranking these as well. So I think we'll probably start with skull crushers. Ranking.
B tier.
So she's putting these in the B tier. I, as the person who's operating the mouse, am probably going to drop these to C tier.
Why?
I'm getting to that. The reason I might drop these to C tier, right? We have probably not going to perform these for lower reps for strength. That doesn't seem like a particularly good use of the motion. So we're using these for hypertrophy of the triceps. Usually when we finish a pressing session, we are going to be roughly near kind of the maximum recoverable volume. We might be able to hit for the pecs, but the triceps could probably handle more. So we're going to do a tricep isolation hypertrophy exercise to kind of top out that volume. In my opinion, that's a very effective way to kind of address building your press, is to look at how much more triceps we can handle at the end of the session, right? And these are a heavy isolation type exercise. We're able to load up the tricep with quite a bit of load, do a lot of damage to that tricep in a good way on a set-to-set basis, and probably fill that exercise slot wonderfully. The problem is for a lot of people, the limiting factor when doing skull crushers is their elbows recovering, not necessarily the musculature of the tricep. And I would think that's the case for a lot of people. I would say that those people should probably try to eventually progress towards being able to do skull crushers. But at that point in time, for most people, they're not the best way to fill that exercise slot because we're going to be looking at a limiting factor that is something other than the muscle and adding some joint fatigue that doesn't need to be there. But that being said, for people that can do these would be an S tier. They're a great way to fill that volume at the end. Maybe even more disruptive to homeostasis, so maybe even a bigger stimulus than something a little bit lower scale, like what we're going to rank next, which is tricep press down. Where would you rank?
S tier.
Okay, 100% agree, right? On a set-to-set basis, we might be able to actually get a little bit more growth out of the skull crushers as the heavier, greater range of motion compound, but most people are going to be able to do press downs to fill up that tricep volume. They're a staple of almost every program I write because we can do them with a rope, which is very uninvasive on the elbows, a straight bar, a V-bar, and almost everyone is going to be able to kind of fill up that additional tricep volume using this exercise. And because they work so well for so many people to fill that exercise slot, I would put these in S tier. They're a staple of most programs if you've seen anything that I've written.
And I feel like they're easier to take to failure than...
Yeah, I would agree. You can kind of get a lot of motion of the humerus, so your upper arm moving and kind of swinging into the skull crushers, whereas it's relatively simple to just keep the elbows in the same spot and take a tricep press down a little bit closer to failure. Which brings me to the next one. Very, very similar to the skull crusher, kind of filling that same slot. None of these things we're doing in that lower 1 to 6 rep range. We're probably keeping these 6+ practically. Again, trying to fill up that extra volume. Again, these are awesome like the skull crusher. It's a relatively heavy motion. By elevating that upper arm above our head, we're taking the tricep, the long head of the tricep. They're a huge range of motion. These do a lot of damage set to set on the tricep. Really good tricep builder. I have always had healthy elbows myself, so these used to be a staple. I used to do, I believe, 5 working sets of 8 to 15 to end one of my pressing sessions every week for like 4 years. These were always treated me very well, but again, like the skull crusher, these can be quite hard on people's elbows and might not be the best for a large percentage of people. But if you can do them, these are S tier. I feel very guilty putting these exercises in C tier because I love them, but from a there's people other than me perspective, probably not ideal.
And you get a great pump in the long head of your tricep.
Apparently, you get a very nice pump in the long head of your tricep. And then I think the next one we're going to look at is a decline bench. What would you rank? I don't think you've ever done these.
I did. Remember when I did bodybuilding?
Oh, okay. All right.
So,
well, where would you rank it as this is specifically as a bench exercise, not just whether you like it, like a bench accessory.
I think probably C or D. I'll probably go D just because I feel like there's better ways to accomplish what you try to accomplish with the decline bench, especially like if you're using it as an overload exercise or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. I would probably bump it up to C because it can have a time and a place. A close grip decline can be a good tricep hypertrophy exercise. It could be workable there. It's fun. The reduction in the range of motion is pretty suboptimal in my opinion. And if we were to take these as like an overload strength exercise, I don't think there's any reason I would ever select these over a board press, because with the board press, we still get to practice setting up. We get to practice our unrack. We get to practice that beginning of our negative in a very specific manner. So not only are we getting some good strength carryover, but potentially some skill carryover. The decline bench probably doesn't offer these to the same degree for maybe a similar strength stimulus. So I would put these at the bottom of C tier, which is going to bring us to our next one, board presses.
I know you like close grip board press as a tricep exercise. I think I'd put it slightly higher than the decline bench. I think I'd put it in B tier.
All right, we're going A tier.
Oh,
okay. We love board presses around here. One of the reasons I like this exercise so much is because it can fill 2 roles. The first role is, like we talked about, as a strength focused exercise if you deem it necessary to do partials on your bench, which can have a time and a place, and they're going to allow more technical practice than maybe some other motions might. in that strength slot, and it can serve a good purpose in a hypertrophy slot. A lot of people find when they do a close grip bench press, the limiting factor for how many reps they get is either their shoulders or their chest rather than a tricep. So we're kind of missing the point of that exercise slot potentially. And by introducing either a close grip spoto press or a close grip board press, we can make the limiting musculature what we wanted it to be when we selected that exercise. I think it serves both of these very well. I've hit like a 3x10 on close grip board presses during my hypertrophy phases plenty of times before with a good amount of luck. So I would definitely put those comfortably up in the A tier. The next one we're going to go with floor press. Where are you ranking a floor press?
B tier for sure. I think it's probably going to have good skill carryover, but I feel like I see a lot of people struggling in the bottom range of their bench anyway.
Yeah, so most people, right, we kind of tend to err away from partials, right, because we're going to get a worse hypertrophy response. Mechanically speaking, that bottom position of the bench press is probably the hardest part. So shying away from that range of motion more often than not isn't the best use of time, especially for a lot of intermediate beginner lifters. As far as the strength motion goes, they absolutely are a solid stimulus. The complaint I would have is kind of akin to the decline bench, where we're not getting as much practice in our setup. We're sparing a little fatigue on the lower back, which is a positive. I know that Coach Bald Omni-Man, I know he is a big fan of a small deficit floor press to where basically you're able to touch your chest again, and in which case he feels it's very comparable to doing a machine chest press. So as a hypertrophy exercise, it can have its place. As a strength exercise, I'm not huge on it personally, especially if we're talking specifically for carryover to the barbell bench press. The next one we are going to rank. We're going to rank lat pull downs. Actually, we'll start with pull-ups. We're going to start pull-ups. Where are we putting these as a bench accessory? What do you think?
A tier, only because for a lot of people, the rep range is going to have to be pretty low, especially at the beginning of doing pull-ups. So I think that means you would be using it more for strength and less for hypertrophy, which may not be ideal as an accessory for bench.
I'm gonna get myself in trouble on YouTube, and I'm gonna put them in a C tier as specifically as a bench exercise, not as accessory motion, not as an exercise. So when we're looking to develop our upper back for the bench press, we're kind of looking for two things. We're looking for general hypertrophy of the upper back, and we're looking for kind of motor control skill of the upper back. So that mind muscle connection, the control of where our scaps are, how our ability to move our scaps through space. And for most people, we are going to have a very hard time getting into like hypertrophic focused rep ranges while also maintaining a very high level of motor skill on the pull-ups. Almost always, we're probably going to be better off with a pull down for this specific goal. That being said, if you don't have a pull down, these can absolutely get the job done. We can add a band if we need to. We could add weight if we need to. They can work, but I rate them much more highly as either an upper back development tool, like generally, an upper back strength development tool for sure. But yeah, maybe as a deadlift accessory, I think they're phenomenal. But specifically when we're talking about the bench and the role of the back, a lot of that is just the ability to generate tightness. I don't think these are going to serve that role quite as well as a pull down would. I'll put these in the B tier. I was going to put it in the C tier, but I feel guilty. It's a good exercise. But that brings us to the lat pull down. Where are you ranking this?
S tier.
S tier. Absolutely correct, right? Generally speaking, I am a believer, not because of some magical push to pull ratio or anything like that. I am a big believer that including some antagonistic muscle training in your bench training regimen is helpful to develop that control of the upper back, that hypertrophy of the upper back. The lat pull down is going to let us select weights to get into the rep ranges we wanted to get into to grow the back while still being able to connect with the back. As long as we're working hard, we're going to see that noticeable hypertrophy of the upper back and maybe even have a little bit of that skill transference over to our bench press.
And they can be good warm-up too.
And they can also be a very good warm-up. I think next that's going to bring me to something kind of similar. Where are we ranking a chest-supported row?
I know you love these. I love them less. but I think they're a good exercise. I'll probably put them in S tier.
All right, so I would agree. I'd put these at the bottom of S tier. Following this premise that we should be training our antagonistic musculature, having a horizontal and a vertical pull is nice. The vertical pull is going to be biased a little bit more towards the lats, whereas the horizontal pull is going to be biased towards that other smaller upper back musculature, maybe a little bit more associated with retraction, whereas the pull down is going to be training the depression of the scaps. The nice part about a chest supported row is, again, we've got fine control of the weight to make sure that we're getting that good motor skill, as well as training the upper back hard to see it grow. And it's not going to add any peripheral fatigue to our lower back, which is just not the point of the exercise. Might take away from our other training days. There's no reason necessarily we would need to see any lower back fatigue, which is going to bring us to our next one, the barbell row, specifically for building up the bench press. How are we ranking it?
I will put it in B only because I feel guilty putting it
We're going
any
in
lower.
D tier with this shit. Frankly, it's just going to be a worse version of a chest supported row or even other rowing variations. Inverted row would probably be better for a couple of reasons. One is that we're getting lower back fatigue for no real reason. That's not going to be anything that's relatively helpful for our bench press, so that's a downside. Another downside would be that we're introducing a bunch of things that could be the limiting factor other than our upper back musculature, like our lower back or our core stability or whatever, however we want to coin that. And people would have a propensity to cheat this exercise a little bit more when really we want to be taking the upper back towards that muscular failure with a good mind-muscle connection, which is a lot easier to do on anything with a dumbbell chest-supported row, chest-supported T-bar row. There's a lot of things that we're going to do this better. Is it useless? Absolutely not. If it's all you got, it's going to get the job done. But I think it could be replaced with a hell of a lot of different exercises. The next one. All right, where are we ranking hammer curls?
For bench?
For bench.
D.
Good call. All right, we're going to throw the hammer
Below
curls down in the
barbell
D
row.
tier. So the thought process here, right, and the reason a lot of people will ask about hammer curls in particular is they say, well, hey, Sam, logically speaking, if we're under the idea that training antagonistic musculature is helpful, right? We're doing some overhead pressing and some pull downs. We're doing some horizontal pressing and some horizontal pulls. Well, the triceps are supposedly super important for our bench press. Why are we not training the antagonistic musculature for the biceps?
People argue too for stability.
Yeah, they're stabilizing. The antagonistic muscles are stabilizers, right? And the reason is because we're probably getting enough peripheral training for our biceps and just our pulling in our chest supported rows and our pull downs to where additional bicep training for additional stability, we're hitting that minimum for that muscle to be as strong as it needs to be. There's a strong argument to be made that just by stabilizing, it's hitting that threshold. But if we like to include some antagonistic training, as I like to do, I think we're already getting that level of bicep stimulus that's helpful from our pulling motions. Some people find it helpful for elbow health, in which case that's a specific, almost different exercise slot, which I could totally sign off on. Just strengthening the musculature surrounding a joint is generally helpful.
And so is having big biceps.
But as far as an accessory, I can't put it too highly. But you should do your curls for big arms because those are important. The next one, we're going to go lateral raises.
D.
D? I agree. We're going to put the lateral raises in the middle of D tier.
Do overhead press instead.
What?
Oh, no, that's front delt. Don't listen to me.
Listen, okay, so...
So this does nothing, then?
I wouldn't say it's nothing, right? There's a role that you could say of like, okay, well, hypertrophying our lateral delt and our upper back could be helpful for keeping our shoulders healthy, but we're not going to see a tremendous amount of carryover. Assuming our shoulder health is solid, we're not going to see any transference. This isn't even necessarily hypertrophying the most relevant musculature there is. Your lateral delts are active during the bench press, but the chance that the lateral fibers of your delt are a limiting factor within your bench press are quite low. They can have their place for training to keep your shoulders healthy, for sure, especially in a giant set of rear delt flies, lateral raises, and front raises. That's a great routine to try to keep the shoulder joint healthy and strong. But that being said, probably not the best in terms of our bench accessories. I would include them in that giant set. If that giant set was an option here as just a general shoulder maintenance type routine, I would put that up in the B tier, but I do not have one for that. Which brings me to front raises. Where are we putting
This
these?
is where my answer would have been more relevant of do an overhead press motion instead. I think these are a low C tier or D tier exercise.
All right, I like this
And
pick.
people also do weird versions of these sometimes where they move it around and stuff and it looks funny.
Yeah, people do botch their front raises, but I would agree. I think low C tier is a great spot for these. The front delt is going to be a primary mover within the motion. We're training a primary mover. It can't be that bad if we're training a primary mover. And in theory, right, if we look at the horizontal travel of the bar, so from our touch point back towards our neck, that's largely part of the role of the front delts within the press. And the front raise kind of mirrors this motion. So on paper, we could say, oh, this seems like it'd be very helpful. And I would tell you anecdotally that something like either a close grip bench or an overhead press is going to train this function a hell of a lot better on a set-to-set basis than a front raise. But they're not useless. We're going to develop the upper back a bit. We're going to develop the front delt a bit, and that can't hurt. Definitely, I would say more relevant than the lateral raises, more relevant than the hammer curls for sure. So I'd put them bottom of C tier. The next one we are going to rank is going to be 3-count bench press.
I think this is an S tier, especially if you're training for powerlifting. I think it's a great way to humble yourself, especially if you have someone else counting for you. Because I see it's very rare that someone actually does a 3-count. But I think, like I said earlier, really working on that bottom range is important. Especially if you're on a big bench that's to comp standard.
We're going to top of S tier. As far as direct transference, these are going to be great. They mirror the bench press closely. They're going to carry over in technique to the bench press a lot. They're almost the exact same thing. We're going to be challenging what is the most mechanically difficult position within the bench press for additional time. Really focus on that skill of staying tight under the weight, not letting it sink into your chest excessively, exposing ourselves to that really hard position. It can also lead to some very good technical transfer. Some people who get very little out of their leg drive, a lot of that is that the timing of their leg drive is either really early or really late, and including a 3-count can help that very quickly get that timing synced up and see people get a lot more out of their leg drive. It's going to carry over for most people to include some kind of a bit longer pause work within your bench. Now the next one, wide grip bench press. What do we think?
Unless that's your comp grip.
No, it's wider than comp grip.
Oh, I don't
Like
know if
a close
I'm
grip bench?
familiar with people doing that, so I have no idea.
So this used to be a big thing in the old school era, right? We had a lot of guys who did close grips, but we also had a lot of guys who did wide grips. The idea was, oh, well, you bring your grip in and we train the triceps a little extra. Well, you bring your grip out, we train the chest a little extra. And this absolutely does work. I think that wider grip bench presses, so long as you're able to generate sufficient upper back tension. If you can't, you're probably going to jack yourself up, which for a solid percentage of people, this might not be a great idea. But if you're able to create sufficient upper back tightness performing these for higher reps, they're a very solid chest hypertrophy exercise, especially if you're not someone with a big arch. And then for lower reps, assuming we can perform these in a relatively safe manner, maybe only 2 to 3 finger widths wider than our competition grip, they can also have their place. I think that generally these would be outperformed by maybe a Larson press in terms of a hypertrophy slot. I think maybe they would be slightly outperformed by even a Larson press in terms of a strength slot, but I think it's a very solid motion that a lot of people will see success from. I'm going to put these top of B tier. They can absolutely be worked, especially in a limited equipment environment. We all know lots of exercises to train our triceps, but training the chest and taxing the chest a little bit more than our competition bench, a wider grip bench absolutely opens up an opportunity there. The next one we are going to rank, I think, will be, we're going to do close grip bench. Where are we ranking it?
I would want to put it, I know we talked about how you like close grip board press better, so I'd put it below it in A tier. I really like how these feel. Maybe I'm just lucky that it feels good to me, but I really like how big the range of motion feels.
Yeah, okay, so here's what I'd say. I agree. I put these bottom at A tier. I would definitely agree with that assessment. I think that they're a great hypertrophy motion. If we need to modify the motion with a board or a spoto press to make sure the triceps are the limiting musculature, we can do that. I think they're a great strength motion. The one thing, just some additional information that I would include in here as a caveat for you guys, is if you're someone who benches with your competition grip that is already relatively close-ish, myself in this category, potentially Kirsten in this category, I don't think that going any closer is the best strength stimulus there is, or even necessarily hypertrophy stimulus. I think it just gets awkward, and it's not different enough to be that different of a stimulus. And if we wanted to take our regular bench, if we are a narrow to moderate grip bencher, and we wanted to bias that motion towards the triceps, I might look to something like pressing against bands, pressing against chains, pressing to a two board, doing a pin press. Maybe bias it towards the triceps in a different way if you're someone who benches close. But if you're someone who benches with a wider grip, a closer grip bench is a phenomenal, phenomenal variation. I just think that going even closer, if you're already a close grip bencher, isn't always the move, at least in my experience as a close grip bencher. The next one we are going to go with is probably going to be incline bench press.
I would say S tier.
I'm going to go top of A tier. I think this is a super helpful and versatile exercise. Performed for a little bit higher reps. It's a great hypertrophy motion where we're taking the chest, the shoulders, and the triceps through a very large range of motion. Very, very beneficial in that regard. For a strength motion, it's a great way of reducing an arch, actually. If someone benches with a big arch and we're like, okay, for one of our variations for strength, we're going to take away some of that arch and challenge the shoulders at a slightly different angle. We could reduce the arch by a feet up or a Larson press, or we could just toss them on an incline where they're going to be forced to press at a slightly more vertical angle. And it's going to work very well for that. Some people, their shoulders aren't going to hold up great for these, and that's maybe something they should work to progressing towards within their training, building that stability, that strength towards those more stretched positions to where they're able to do them. But I would say these are on average a very, very solid exercise with a lot of different uses. The next one we are going to rank, we're going to rank SSB JM presses. Actually, let's start with regular JM presses. That's a little simpler.
I think very similar to skull crushers. But
yeah, okay. So for those of you not familiar, a JM press is probably a halfway point between a close grip bench press and a skull crusher. Depending on who you ask, there's going to be a wide variety of executions for these. If you go to JM Blakely himself, he had a certain way of doing them. Eric Spoto had a little bit more of a close grip bench way of doing them. Bill Kazmaier had a very similar exercise he would do in the Smith machine. So there's a wide variety of ways to do these. They're a great tricep motion when you kind of get a feel for what works for you. Although I'm going to categorize these as an advanced motion, not because anything bad is going to happen if you do these and you're not advanced. It's just kind of hard to get a feel for how to do a folding press if you haven't done a reasonable amount of training already. It's just going to feel very awkward and foreign, and we might not be able to take the triceps towards mechanical failure. But if you're someone who's skilled enough to be able to do these, they're easier on the elbow than a skull crusher or an overhead. I think they're a very, very solid motion if you get to the point where you're comfortable doing these. The problem is that it does take a while to kind of develop the skill of having a good jam press, folding press. So I'm going to put those high B just because so many people aren't that close to being able to do them yet. The utility of them is a little bit more limited in that regard, but I really do like them. The next one is going to be a SSB JM press, which kind of bring an SSB down. Once the things come in contact with your chest, it folds towards your chest. It's kind of an easy way to standardize these. Real conjugate type exercise. Where are we ranking these?
I don't know. I've never done it with an SSB.
So I have. Some people take these very heavy because it's a very tricep-centric motion that can be taken very heavy, somewhat comfortably. I've worked up to a heavy set of 5. I've done 3 plates on these. Not that that's the most impressive thing. It is easier for sure than a regular skull crusher. But I've done a lot of weight on these. Never really saw a purpose to taxing your elbows that much for something that is inherently not that specific. I never really saw a reason to take these heavy as a strength exercise. I don't see the benefit there. But as a hypertrophy exercise, they're super viable. It's a pain to do higher reps on them, but it can definitely work. I don't know. They're kind of interesting one. They're fun. And they can get the job done. I just don't think they're anything special. So I don't know. I'll throw them between the French presses and the skull crushers. They're going to get the job done. I don't think there's anything magical about the exercise, though. Next, we are going to do bada bing, bada boom. We're gonna do dumbbell bench press. Where are we tossing this one?
S tier, top of S
Goddamn,
tier.
goddamn right, S tier. Probably right below the 3 count. The reason that we love, oh shit, it needs to go in the right spot. The reason we love dumbbell bench press, again, this is another staple of most programs I write, is these are going to get a lot of things done, right? We can train, like we can get some strength transference because they're challenging our stability. Okay, huge caveat actually. We are not going to be holding the dumbbells squared up for these. If we hold the dumbbells squared up and we bring it all the way down, because of where the weight is, it's actually going to be a lesser range of motion than we would be able to get out of a barbell. And generally for hypertrophy and strength variations, usually we're going to be looking for the same or greater range of motion, not a lesser range of motion, with some small exceptions, maybe like the board press. Big fan of the board presses. But generally speaking, we're going to favor longer ranges of motion. And in this case, it would actually be smaller. But if we rotate the dumbbells to 45 degrees or to parallel with one another, we are going to get an equal to or greater than range of motion than we're able to get with a bar. So A, we get a varied stimulus in terms of, okay, cool, we get a neutral grip, so it's a little different. We get to train the pecs through a greater range of motion, the shoulder girdle through a greater range of motion, both for strength and stability and hypertrophy, right? We have to practice that skill of kind of pulling our upper back into that bottommost position, into a deeper position. And because it's taxing the stability, we can see that strength carryover. So if we are training these in, let's just say the hypothetical 8 to 12 range, and cool, we're using this extended range of motion to hypertrophy the relevant musculature, and it's going great. I would go so far as to say, because the stability is challenging within this motion, that we could even see some carryover to our upper end benching strength by just progressing our sets of 10 on these full range of motion, neutral grip to 45-degree grip dumbbell benches. I think that they are phenomenal for strength. They're phenomenal for hypertrophy. They're phenomenal for keeping your shoulders healthy. As long as you know how to execute them, where we're really pulling them into you at the bottom and kind of pulling yourself into an arch and rotating the hands, they're about as good as they get.
And you can also do them to warm up. I just do light ones to warm up, and then I do heavy after my bench.
Yep, and Mr. Bald Omni-Man, I know, also is a huge fan of using an extended range of motion motion to warm up. The next one we're going to touch on, because it's going to fall into a similar exercise slot a lot of the time, would be a chest press machine. Where are we ranking?
A chest press?
Yep.
I don't know. I think dumbbells are better.
Yeah.
So maybe like a B or C.
Yeah, I'm probably going to put this right next to the floor press.
It's just a worse way of doing what you could do with a dumbbell.
I tend to agree. As long as it's not taxing on our rotator cuffs, we're going to probably get a very similar amount of hypertrophy out of the chest press machine, assuming we can get as much range of motion out of the chest press as we can with the dumbbells, which isn't always the case. But assuming we're getting about the same range of motion, we're probably going to see a similar amount of hypertrophy. But because we're not taxing our ability to stabilize and we're not taxing necessarily our skill component, there's no possibility that this is going to really have a ton of meaningful carryover to your upper end strength on the benching, right? So the hypertrophying the relative, like the hypertrophying the relevant musculature is always going to be helpful, but it's not as though you're like, okay, well, I put 20 pounds on my chest press. I know that's going to show up in my bench press. If I add, a genuine 20 pounds to my working sets of dumbbells for 3 sets of 10, I do expect to notice a different feeling within my main work. So I'd say definitely can work for that hypertrophy slot, but in a perfect world, you're using dumbbells there probably. The next one, ranking Yukon bar or Duffalo bar or bench camber bar, any bar that's going to extend our range of motion. Where are we ranking this?
I would either put that in low S tier or high A tier.
I'm gonna bump it down actually. So this is a very good motion, right? Again, we're training through that extended range of motion because the bar is bowed a little bit. It does challenge our stability, so it's a very good strength exercise to build up, strength in that slightly excess range of motion. Really develop the pecs, develop power around the chest. Like we talked about, because that bottom position is the most mechanically disadvantageous part, anything that's really challenging down there is generally going to be a good accessory. Super good, right? For anyone that can do these well, they yield good returns. The problem is that it seems, just observationally in my coaching, it seems as though there's a solid percentage of people, no matter how well they execute this motion is a little problematic. It just leads to the occasional rotator cuff strain, the occasional pec strain, and I really don't believe they're doing anything wrong within their progression in the exercise. It's just not a great fit for them. And that happens somewhat often. But for the people for whom this works, it's gold. It's a great exercise. It's as good as they come. But there's enough people that this doesn't click for that I'm going to have to relegate this to the top of B tier, which is a shame because it does work so well for so many people. The next one we're going to look at, push-ups. What do you think?
I think A tier. I think they're super accessible. You can definitely, if you've ever done a set of push-ups to failure, you know that they feel like they're doing something. I think they're a great exercise.
Yeah, so here's the breakdown. If you are very weak or a beginner, I don't want to insult you by saying very weak, but I'm saying you're very new to strength training. It's going to be very impractical to use push-ups as a hypertrophy motion. It's going to be hard to get in enough reps for it to be a really good hypertrophy stimulus quite yet, but it could be a good strength motion for you. And then maybe you could go get some lighter dumbbells or a lighter bar to do your higher rep hypertrophy focused training. We move into most people, that category of like you're pretty strong for your body weight. These are going to be a little bit impractical to train as a strength motion. Getting down to like 5 RM, you're going to have a lot of weight in a backpack, and it's going to be a pain to set up. It's probably not ideal, but these are going to be a phenomenal exercise for just getting in more pressing volume, hypertrophying the relevant musculature in the pecs, the shoulders, and the triceps. They tend to be very easy on the shoulders. They're extra volume that really doesn't tend to bang you up all that bad, which is a big benefit. They definitely fill that slot amazingly. And then when you get really strong, it's a little bit of a pain. It would be crazy to use them as a strength exercise, and then even as a hypertrophy exercise. You could put some plates in a backpack and you're still gonna have to do 30 reps. And, I generally like to get my hypertrophy work down into that 12 to 15 rep range a lot of the time, just so I don't have to count so damn high. You could use those higher rep sets. The data we have kind of suggests that, assuming the proximity to failure is the same, a tough set of 30 is going to be not that different from a tough set of 15 or a tough set of 12. But it gets a little impractical. But for the vast majority of people, these are some awesome volume for getting some hypertrophy in. I'm going to leave them there because I have my own bias as someone who's longer into my strength training journey. It's kind of impractical to use these. So I'm like, oh, fuck that. I'm not going to put it ahead of a close grip or an incline. But for most of you, it probably should maybe even be ahead of those. The next one, face pull. Where are we putting it?
S tier.
All right, face pulls. I tend to agree. I think we're going to put these bottom of S tier. We are training that antagonistic musculature again, right? This time we're training that function of retraction of the scapula. Training antagonistic musculature is definitely something that I have buy-in to. And the real nice part about these is we're going to be training that antagonistic musculature, and we're hitting two birds with one stone. We're hitting their upper back musculature, but we're also hitting a loaded external rotation. The pec and the lat are internal rotators of the shoulder. If you're someone who buys into the idea of structural symmetry, then we probably want to train external rotation at least a little bit. And the face pulls are a great way to do this while we're also getting in some of that volume. Very practical, staple of many of my programs, just because it's a good way to kind of get the different functions we're kind of trying to get in out of the way.
And you can hit your rear delts and not even feel like you're doing not very fun rear delt motion.
Well, speaking of, where are we ranking rear delt flies?
On the machine?
We can say machine, dumbbells, whatever, cables, whatever you want. We'll call it any rear delt fly.
I think for bench, it's nowhere near a face pull. I think it might be kind of a waste of a motion. So I put it in like D or C.
Going A tier.
What?
I think that, again, we're training the function of retraction of the scaps. We kind of have two things we're looking to do with our upper back. One is retract, one is depress, especially as we reach that bottom position of the bench press where that retracted depress position is the most relevant. We don't necessarily need to retract and depress as hard as we can at the top. The scaps need to be able to move within the motion, but we are trying to achieve a heavily retracted and depressed position at the very bottom of our bench. So it's a good way to train like retraction. We're building up that antagonistic musculature. The problem with them comparatively is that we don't get to that cool two birds, one stone effect where generally a face pull is going to get two things done. A rear delt fly is going to get one thing done. But that being said, it does that one thing quite well. So I'd probably put that at the bottom of A tier.
I'm also biased because I'm really bad at them.
The next one we're going to look at is we're going to look at a barbell overhead press. Where are we ranking this?
I think A tier.
All right, I'm gonna put it probably high B tier.
Really?
So within our training program, we probably want to be progressing something where we are pressing in a vertical plane to really tax the front delts. The shoulder, the primary mover of the shoulder girdle is the deltoid. Keeping your deltoid strong is a big step towards keeping your shoulders healthy. Having a small surplus of strength in your front delt, I find generally helpful. It kind of improves your margin for error. You can misgroove your bar on the bench and get away with it a little bit more if you've got that small surplus of front delt strength. And for the most part, it doesn't seem to matter that much what that vertical press is. As long as we're progressing on something that's taxing those front delts, we're kind of getting the job done. Um, that being said, the problem with a standing overhead press is we're introducing the idea of balance and core stability as a potential limiting factor that isn't the shoulders or the shoulder stability, and it's going to have no relevance to the bench press. So we're introducing a potential limiting factor that has nothing to do with bench pressing. But just because something isn't optimal doesn't mean it's not very effective. On a set-to-set basis, you're still going to get a lot of damn good training for your front delts out of this. And the other problem is potentially we could be adding some lower back stress that is not going to be helpful within our bench pressing, especially if you're someone who arching tends to already add some lower back fatigue. There might be some unwanted fatigue from the standing overhead press. Now we're going to rank the seated dumbbell press.
These are one of my favorite exercises of all time. I put them in high A tier. Maybe not the highest slot, but high A tier.
Okay, yeah, so with these, we're going to attach that same caveat. If we have them squared up and we have that limited range of motion, I would probably put these towards the bottom of B tier. They're going to check off that box of training a vertical range of motion, but with that lesser range of motion rather than greater range of motion, we probably would want to bias towards we probably want to take it through a greater range of motion. So we're going to assume we're turning these dumbbells to 45 degrees or to parallel so we can get that extended range of motion. Because we're seated, we've removed balance or core stability as a limiting factor. Only shoulder stability and contractile properties of the pressing muscles are going to be the limiting factor, which probably means it's going to have a little bit more carryover to the bench press. So assuming we're turning these to 45 degrees or to neutral to get that big range of motion, I'm going to go ahead and put these in S tier. There's other things that are going to get the job done more or less as well, but there's not anything that I would call better than a seated dumbbell overhead press for checking off that box of, hey, are we getting stronger in some capacity overhead? I probably put these right up in here. They're going to check that box perfectly well, and I can say with honesty, there's probably nothing that's going to check that box significantly better.
As long as you're doing them lower than the top of your ears.
Yeah. Next one, pec fly. Let's go.
I think that unless you are advanced, and if you're doing strength training, this is a really dumb exercise. That's a waste of time. I think it's D tier. I'd put it in F tier if I could. I hate this one. I hate seeing beginners do it. I think they should just go bench instead.
Cold take. Right. So if we assume the idea that just hypertrophying our relevant musculature is going to be very helpful in building up our lift, one of the biggest predictors of how strong someone is how big the relevant muscles are. Ending your bench training with only tricep work doesn't make sense. Why would we not hypertrophy the chest? I think the big thing between most beginner and intermediate lifters and having a pretty solid bench press, a lot of that comes down to hypertrophy of the chest in particular. Some extra volume can be helpful for sure. It can teach you to kind of retract your scaps and load that stretched pec position, which is certainly a big benefit to this exercise. But that being said, if you're doing enough benching, your pecs should probably be pretty near their maximum recoverable volume. If we're doing our flat pressing, we're doing our variations of the bench press, and we're doing our dumbbell benching or our chest pressing, we probably shouldn't have the training economy left to do these pec flies necessarily. It's potentially we could, but it's very likely that we don't. If we do, we maybe should be doing a little bit more of the dumbbell pressing, for example. That being said, just growing your pecs is going to be very helpful for your bench. It's one of the reasons that an shitty amateur bodybuilder has a lot better bench than a shitty amateur powerlifter is that focus on developing all three of the primary movers as well as the back. So I would put this in the middle of C tier. It's certainly not useless. And I don't dislike it as much as Kirsten does. Second to last one, dips. Where are we ranking dips?
I think it's a similar concept, obviously, to the pull-ups, but I think it's less difficult to get to the higher reps of dips, in my opinion. So I think I'd put it around pull-ups or higher.
Okay, I think we're gonna put this maybe A tier. So on paper, the dip can be trained for strength, direct carryover to the bench press in that 1 to 5 range, or it could be trained as a general hypertrophy motion for the pecs, shoulders, and triceps. In my opinion,
I
for
think
the
you can
most
overload it pretty well.
Yep, and you can go quite heavy on it. For most people, I don't think that you're going to see direct transference from heavy dips to bench press unless you're a beginner. I think that it's far enough away that taking it heavy isn't always going to yield good carryover. Every now and then there's someone who gets good carryover out of it. My brother does get good transference directly from it. But a lot of the time, this is just a very good hypertrophy exercise for the triceps, for the chest, and to a lesser degree for the delts. And I think it does a very good job of that on a set for set basis. I would pick these over a chest press if we're doing a pec bias dip. I might pick these over a JM press if we're doing a tricep bias dip. So I'd probably put these at the bottom of A tier. They're not necessarily always going to give you that direct carryover, but at the same time, they're damn good as a hypertrophy exercise. And that brings me to the last one. Good picture selection, I know. Larson press.
I would put Larson in S tier. I think it's a phenomenal exercise. Also, anecdotally, the other day I started my hypertrophy block, and I was doing normal bench with my feet down and not pausing very well, and not really feeling much in my chest. And then I did one set of Larson with like 20 pounds less than I was using for my working sets of bench, and that was enough for me to feel like I had totally smoked my benching muscles. It was awesome. So S tier, awesome.
Yeah, I think we're going to put that probably towards the top of S tier. The reason I like Larson press quite a bit is it's close enough to a bench press where we're going to get good skill carryover. That's awesome. It's also close enough to a bench press that if we have selected the motion well and we're someone who gets a lot of weight out of our leg drive, maybe, that taking away that leg drive and building our upper end strength that way will yield some direct carryover. So it could be very helpful in that 1 to 5 range for direct carryover to our bench press. And unlike the 3 count bench press, it's also extremely useful in a hypertrophy slot. We can just take these to the 8 to 12 or the 8 to 15 range. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And it can absolutely fill that role. And just like, training, how we talked about how training the dumbbell bench in the hypertrophic rep ranges can sometimes lead to some carryover directly to your upper end benching strength. Well, hell, if we're doing sets of 10 on the Larson press, that absolutely could also carry over directly to our upper end pressing strength on the comp motion. So we might even get some carryover from a hypertrophy slot. It's going to do a great job hypertrophying the upper body musculature by taking away maybe the lower body as a bit of a crutch. Again, I would talk about these as a hypertrophy exercise similarly to what I was saying about the dumbbell bench. I think that if you have the recovery capability, rather than finishing up your benching and doing 3 sets of 8 to 12 chest press, you'd probably be better off doing 3 sets of 8 to 12 on a Larson press. So that is all of our exercises.
And they're good if your back hurts.
And they're also,
you can still
that's also
bench.
true. You can spare yourself some lower back fatigue. If for someone who really battles arching, causing you low back fatigue, and you want to get in a higher frequency on the bench press, but your back would get jacked up, it
Day after
also
deadlifts.
offers a very good tool in that regard as well. So that is all of our exercises. If we missed any, you can put them in the comments. Thank you guys for watching. That is all. Don't forget to like the video. If you enjoyed the video, you can also subscribe and leave a comment.